Right. Good day, all, and welcome to another edition of Local Legislator Live at 11. I am your host, Charles Gates. And like I say every day, we have a special treat for you. But before I introduce our guest for this morning, I want to share with you that we are a component of locallegislator.net, where our mission is to be the premier source of local election information in the United States and an advocate for the sustainability of local business nationwide. And Local Legislator Live at 11, where local politics are made simple. Our guest this morning is none other than the author of Workaholics Adrift, Miss Judy McCandless. Good morning, Judy. How are you?
Good morning. Great, great.
Oh,
Thank you.
I like that. I like that. All right, full of energy at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Fantastic.
gotta be, gotta
All
be.
right, good stuff, good stuff. Well, Judy, you know what? We call these raw interviews because there is no fluff, there are no filler words here. We jump right into the interview. So I'm going to ask you the very first question. What inspired you to write this book, Workaholics Adrift, and what exactly is a workaholic?
Well, the inspiration came actually not until after I retired from business. I had a long business career as it ramped up. At retirement, soon after retirement, though, I had to caregive for my husband. And that actually lasted for 10 years. And that's during the period when I wrote the book. I realized at the time, as I did this, and I looked at my journals, I realized that it was important that we had a midlife break for extended travel because our retirement became very uncertain. And workaholic. Oh, that's a wonderful term, isn't it? I had to put that in the title. It's basically a person who is obsessed with a career or an issue to the exclusion of family and community and a spiritual life, and as a result also endures the problems with extreme stress, medical and other. So that is what we faced at the time. We were some around 40 years old.
Now, where did this career break come from?
Well, it was interesting. I think when you change your life, it usually is a result of some crisis or some person that comes into your life. And what happened with us, I was a contract manager for a big Navy contract, an R&D contract, and I worked for Westinghouse Corporation in Sunnyvale, in the Silicon Valley of California. My husband, John, was a sales engineer with all the growing computer industries there, but he was on straight commission, which is an added stress to maintain an income with straight commission. So we were both around age 40, and we were living the workaholic life, stressful jobs. It was lucrative, but long hours. And we were definitely stressed. Our marriage and our health was put at risk for sure. And what happened was a sudden death of a person that my husband worked with really shook us up. He was 41 years old and he collapsed at his desk. And my goodness, that really started us reconsidering our future. Did we want to go this stress road forever till retirement and hope something could happen then? Or do we want to take a step back and look at some options?
Well, you know what, Judy, that reminds me of I had a friend who used to work on Wall Street. And he shared the same type of stories where people were literally dropping dead at their desk because of the high stress level. Again, very lucrative, but because of the endless constant pressure, they just weren't living a life, and it just caught up to them where they were literally dropping dead at their desk. So I'm so happy for you. Now what happened next?
Well, we decided to take baby steps first, which is a good idea for any big change in life. to learn about what you want to do. And we took a leave of absence. I was granted a leave of absence from my corporation for 6 months. And we had a sailboat. We had sailed as kids. So we took a sailboat. We sailed down from San Francisco to Mexico over that period of time. And it really opened our eyes to just more laid back living, a more spiritual life with nature and no time schedules and things to worry about. We just could enjoy life and enjoy each other. And it was a wonderful experience. We did have a storm. We learned how to handle the boat a little better offshore, which we had never done. So there's going to be challenges, but we had that love of lifestyle. So we returned to work. We went back to work in our stressful jobs, but we saved a lot of money, and we spent 3 years actually committed to this and downsizing our lives, which was amazingly difficult, and also educating ourselves on what we were undertaking. We talked to people who had done it before. Eventually, at the end of 3 years, we sold our house, really committed, and we left, quit our jobs. We stopped in Mexico again for several months, and then we crossed straight across the Pacific, 3,000 miles and 28 days outside of the sight of land. And so after 2 years in the Pacific, we ended up in Australia.
Wow. Wow. That's all I can say about that. And it's on a sailboat now, right?
Yeah, it was 35-foot sailboat.
Wow. Now I am not a sailor, but I'm picturing Gilligan's Island and and you guys are on that kind of adventure. Now talk about the differences between the first and second trips into the unknown. Or what were some of the challenges that you were faced with up to and including saving a man's life?
Well, we actually, I consider the leave of absence was our apprenticeship. I liken it to, we made a lot of mistakes. We had the wrong gear. We had the wrong equipment, things like that. And we learned to understand what this kind of a project was all about. It was not all sunsets and root beer or whatever. We just learned what we needed to know. And then the 3 years occurred where we did a lot of research and talked among ourselves and planning and selecting equipment and stuff like that. So our second trip was a full commitment, as I said, and we realized that good preparation was critical to this. So as we progressed in the second trip, oh, and I should mention another part of education was my husband had never worked on an engine. And what he did was, we had his diesel engine in the sailboat. He apprenticed himself on weekends to a diesel mechanic to learn that part of the project. And that guy was committed.
Smart, very, very smart.
That's the kind of thing that I think you need to do with any change that you want to make, and have a dream and follow it is my idea.
Now, it's saving a man's life. Now, how did that, what's the story behind that one?
That occurred in Fiji. That was it was before Australia. It was, we sailed from New Zealand up to Fiji and then over to Australia. But that was a situation where on one of the out islands, there's many island chains within the Fiji Islands. I think 120 islands it's made up of. Wow. And we were out there just visiting a village. We were the only other people there. They have a tradition where if there's a visitor to the village, they assign a young person usually, which is wonderful, to take us around and show us the village and introduce us. Well, that was fine, and we were used to that. But the guide took us to this unusual looking building, which apparently was Western built, but it was fieldstone as opposed to their huts. And she told me, come inside, and she headed for the stairs. Well, upstairs in the attic, it was an A-frame type thing. Up in the attic, we got up there. I couldn't see very well. It was dark. There was a man on the ground wrapped in a blanket. And she said to him, Joni, I have a friend here, can help you. And I said, oh, this man's evidently very sick and perhaps was left to die. And I went over to him, I held his hand. I get emotional thinking about it, but I held his hand and I said, Joni, how are you? And I picked up his hand. It was hot. It was very hot. I put my hand to his forehead. He was hot. He was hot all over. He had a systemic infection, obviously. I am not a nurse. I don't know. I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know the people there. What if I did something wrong? So I was a little stressed, but I saw they have no nurses, no clinics. So I just by instinct, and this is where you have courage you don't know you have, I yelled down to the girl. I said, get some men up here to take him to the beach and get him cooled down. He has to be cooled down. And then I yelled for my husband, who had stopped to talk to the diesel mechanics over there. And I said, come on, John, we've got to go back to the boat and we got some antibiotics, some fresh water, some bandages. And turned out he had a wound that had started in his knee when he was playing, I think they were playing rugby or something. So wow. I believe if we hadn't happened by and I hadn't had the courage to act, that he would have been lost. And I thought it was, when I saw him dark in that blanket, I thought, he's an old man. And I said, well, that's fine. But then when we got him up and out, it turned out he was probably in his 30s, had a wife who was away at another island, and then he had a child, two young boys. And it was a miraculous recovery. Of course, he had never had antibiotics like we take them all the time. Mm-hmm. His body just said, Yahoo, this works. So we stayed in the village for 10 days to make sure he took all the medication. Those kind of things those experiences were just amazing.
Now antibiotics, did he get them from you? You just gave him some of the supplies that you had?
Yes, and there's a fraternity within the sailing community called Yachties. We call ourselves Yachties. And we were advised while we were in Mexico to buy up some antibiotics. You can buy them over the counter there. They're usually actually expired meds from the US. But these folks have never had it, and it's plenty strong enough for them. Mm-hmm. So this fellow recovered miraculously.
What an inspiring story. What inspiring. Now, in back of you, Judy, you've got, we see Meet the Author, Workaholics Adrift, and then it says Transformation in the Pacific Islands. That is your subtitle. Now, this book calls for a transformation in, I would imagine, you and your husband. Now, how did it change you? But before you answer that question, looking at your Amazon reviews, they says that you learn compassion from expats and Pacific Islanders. Now, we know what Pacific Islanders are. What is an expat, and how did this transform you, this whole ordeal?
Well, an expat, I think that was a term the British came up with, and it generally talks about it's an exile, a person in exile who's been or has been thrown out of a country and has to live somewhere else. But in our case, we're kind of expat vagabonds. We saw a lot of countries, and we lived in countries for months, several months at a time, usually. There, for instance, there was another really interesting experience. We met a lot of Australian expats who had moved and started businesses in New Guinea, in Papua New Guinea, which is just north of them. And they were amazing guys. A lot of them had experienced, the older fellows had experienced the war where the Japanese came so close to them and in a tax, and there was
Hmm.
nice. They ran a business. They had leased land from the natives, and that was their life.
Hmm.
That's an example.
How interesting is that? And to our viewers out there, if you like this interview and would like to see more like it, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, connect with us on connect with us on Twitter and Instagram, and like our Facebook page. And most importantly, remember to leave us a comment letting us know who or what you would like to hear from in the future. We will do our best to get that person or that organization rep on the air as quickly as we can. Now, Judy, after surviving a typhoon, also known as a hurricane here in the States, you came home. But before then, you had to overcome a final crisis. Tell us about that episode.
Oh, probably. Well, we lived in Guam for 2 years on the boat, and we worked in Guam. And that was a challenge. I had a job with an Australian construction company, and those characters were like Crocodile Dundee characters. They were a riot, and people from all over the world. It was like the Tower of Babel. I think worked with the construction on the construction site with a Dutch guy who swore in Dutch all the time, and of course nobody knew what that meant, but it was
No.
good, probably. I'm not sure what you meant. Besides, the typhoons were terrible. We had to work and live on the boat, which was more economical. We also had to face a disaster with the Internal Revenue Service, who, as soon as we started working there, they found us. And not that we had done anything illegal, but they thought we owed taxes in California still before we had left. And what happened was they had an audit, an IRS audit, and the fellow we left to do our taxes turned out he had Alzheimer's disease in the meanwhile and kind of lost it. So our taxes kind of got forgotten. So there were penalties to pay and negotiations and all that. That was another crisis. There's all kinds of challenges when you do stuff.
That sounds that sounds like quite the ordeal. Well, you know what? Anytime we are faced with the IRS one-on-one, that in and of itself is a crisis indeed. Now, tell us what makes this memoir different from others.
I wrote the book based on my journals initially. I had never really I'd written some newsletters or something, but I had never tried to do a book. And a memoir, I learned a lot by going to writers' conferences, and in my community, I lived there at the time. I lived in South Carolina, and there was a community that had a writers group, and they helped me a lot with the writing. But I had I think that the difference in the memoir is that I had a mission. I just discovered a theme to it, and how writing it it requires you have like an arc. It's like a story that goes to a climax and then comes back down and a resolution. So I learned some structure to it, and it wasn't just like all that extra details about the story, but I also had to get in depth about my reflections and the things that I learned during this project, which I had to be very frank and open about my emotions as I faced each challenge, and there are many in there.
That's interesting. Now, last question for you, Judy. How can we learn more about you and Workaholics Adrift, and how can we purchase your book?
That's great. I think the best way at this point, I have a really nice book page on Amazon, and I think they did a very nice job for me. I have a nice synopsis, a description of the book, of the story, the whole story. I think you've picked some parts out of it. And then there are reviews from, for instance, the Virginia Gazette had a nice review by Mr. Hale that explained it as a inspirational adventure. And then there was a man that wrote a review that's on there too that was very gratifying. He said, it reads like a good novel. And that's just so thrilling because it means that I did learn something about writing and telling a memoir and making it interesting to others.
But
So,
now,
uh,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Now,
yeah, so
before you go on, let me ask you this real quick. In terms of a novel, was that your intention for it to read like a novel in terms of being so interesting and that it just flows and you can't wait to get to the end?
yeah, there are some tricks, of course, and you probably see them in a lot of media things. They like you to have a cliffhanger at the end of the chapter, for instance, and they like you to have something feed into something and build tension and like that. And
Hmm.
it's definitely makes it one you can't put down, as they say, some people say. It's it's different, and I think it worked. I didn't set out to write a novel. I wanted to. I guess I was going to write a travelogue. I guess that's what I was going to say. A travelogue is different than a, a real memoir because a
Hmm.
travelogue just says we went here, we saw this, we came over there and talked to these people, and there's
Right.
no depth, there's no guts in there,
Hmm.
and that's what I strive to use. And I was lucky that I had kept a journal for all that time. I think journaling is the best thing. I always advise people in book clubs and kids to do is journal. It just, that's the way I could remember the emotions and the sensory part of the events. So
That
that was
is that
most helpful.
is so interesting you say that, Judy, because I just happen to have in my desk, this is my journal. And I will tell you, I know, you know what, as a guy, I always considered journals like diaries and they were for girls.
Yeah.
That's the way I was always brought up until I met a gentleman who you probably know, Mr. Grayson Williams. He used to be in the same organization as us in Toastmasters International. Grayson has passed within the last year. But I will tell you, Grayson used to always tell us, and when I say us, anyone who came within his listening circle, always keep a journal because if you don't write it down, eventually you will probably forget it, and especially the details of whatever that instance or that incident may be. So I've been doing it just about every day ever since he pounded it into my head to keep a journal. So we really like to take that into consideration. And thank you for reiterating that to us and the viewers.
Yeah, that was like, and you can see how you've changed, how your priorities change, and certainly going from being a workaholic to a cruiser, we call it, just cruising along at your own schedule. It brought out a lot of different things, and certainly an appreciation of nature, for instance. Who had
Mm.
time to look at nature? I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, here you are under the Milky Way with no lights to block it out, and the Milky Way. I mean, and being up at dawn with dolphins beside you. I mean, it was just wonderful. I can't imagine. I mean, there's so many benefits to it. Yeah, there were tough times, but wow, it was, and it strengthened our marriage. And we had to trust each other. We worked together. It was just wonderful. So
It's
I recommended that to anyone.
it, I don't know if I'll be going on any Pacific Ocean adventures in the near future, but I will take that under advisement.
No, 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 no. That's why I link it to like starting a business or moving to another town. I mean, another state or something.
Hmm.
It's anything you take on. It's what is that? Oh, I'm trying to think of that quote. There was growth is not comfortable, something like that. You in order to grow, you have to expand, move, press yourself to be challenged. And
Hmm.
that certainly helped me so much. I was kind of a shy kid and I was really a loner even as I was working through administration. But it so opened my eyes.
Well, so glad to talk to you, Judy. And by the way, I like to use that quote too, the one that I use for myself. I don't know if I got it from someone else, but in order to grow, you must put yourself in uncomfortable situations over and over and over again until that becomes comfortable. That, in essence, is the only way we will grow. But Judy
And
McCandless.
oh,
Oh,
just
okay. Go ahead.
let me mention. Oh, I didn't finish about where to get the book. The
Yeah,
book
I was
is
I was going to ask you again.
certainly on Amazon. There's a wonderful spread, and I wanted to say that it's available on all booksellers. It's fully distributed, but the ebook is on sale this month for $3.99.
On
So
on Amazon?
on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whoever you have.
Okay.
So thank you.
You're welcome. And again, for our viewing audiences, you can see the name of the book right in back of Judy. It is Workaholics Adrift Transformation in the Pacific Islands by Judy McCandless. Make sure you pick up your copy as soon as you can so you can get transformed as well. Because at the end of the day, it's all about changing this. Not your forehead, but that thing inside your forehead, your mindset. That is what this is all about. Judy, thank you so much for being with us here today and sharing your insights into what it is like to be on the Pacific Ocean in a sailboat. I can't imagine that, but I am looking forward to reading your book and listening to you describe in detail how that was. Because what I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of I've been on the Pacific Ocean in the Marine Corps, and we were not on sailboats, and it was quite. I'm sharing this with the listening audience. It was quite terrifying to me. We would be in those storms, and the boat would be going into the water. And anyway, that's another story. Well, Jody,
No, I can relate to that because we went to Guadalcanal, and you get
mm,
so immersed in the history. If you've read the story of Guadalcanal, and I'm talking about you lovely Marines, because how they endured, it's remarkable. And we walked Henderson Airfield. We walked to the outdoor museums with all the
is that
gear
right?
it just and we sailed in there at a really overcast day, and the sea was black, and it was just setting that scene, and I could
Mm,
feel it. I could feel those young Marines. They were 17, 18 years old,
mhm.
going in first time. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, if you serve any time in the Marine Corps, you hear all about that, and it is
Right.
quite it is quite daunting indeed. That is so true. Well, thank you, Judy, so much for being with us here today. I hope our listeners were enlightened. Pack up your sailboats, pack up your gear, and let's get out there on that ocean. And since we are, matter of fact, we didn't even mention where we are. We are in Virginia, so we're a long way from the Pacific Ocean, but the Atlantic Ocean is only a stone throw away. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms: LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And when it's all said and done, again, we are Local Legislator Live at 11. And remember, we're not global, we are local, where your local politics made simple. Again, I'm your host, Charles Gates, and we are signing off. And again, Judy, say goodbye to our listeners out there. It's
Thank
been a
you all for listening, and I hope you'll try something new. Baby steps start with baby steps.
Start with baby steps. You heard it from none other than Judy McCandless, the author of Workaholics Adrift Transformation in the Pacific Islands. I'm your host, Charles Gates. This is Local Legislator Live at 11, signing off. Until next time, take care, everyone.